Half-Life is one of the most influential first-person shooters of all time. The storytelling and world building were on another level and blew the competition away. Quake 2 might have had faster combat, Unreal might have been a more beautiful game, but Half-Life truly paved the way for narrative in FPS games, and moved the genre forward. I respect what Half-Life achieved at the time. We weren't just playing as a seasoned military soldier or an intergalactic marine. Gordon Freeman was just a regular person, and the game immersed the player using unbroken level design. While it wasn't my favorite first-person shooter experience, I was interested to play the sequel, especially due to the ending with the G-Man putting Gordon Freeman in some sort of stasis. Half-Life 2 was released 6 years later and received universal praise. This game is worshipped, much like the original game, and praise was given specifically towards Half-Life 2's fancy new physics engine and stunning graphics at the time. Doom 3 came out the same year, and even though I think its lighting is far more impressive, the graphics in Half-Life 2 probably hold up better overall. I mean, the facial animation that makes the characters convey way more emotion was second to none, and Valve innovated yet again. That all being said, without further ado, let's dive into the sequel to Half-Life. Gordon Freeman has been awoken by the G-Man, and it's revealed that due to the events caused by him in the original game, a new alien race known as the Combine has come down and enslaved Earth. Rather than being confined to Black Mesa and Zen, Half-Life 2 gives you an entire city to explore, simply titled City 17. This place is bleak, depressing, and right away, the feeling of hopelessness washes over you. Humanity is at the complete mercy of the Combine, and at the moment at least, there's nothing you can do about it. This cold introduction is far more effective than the opening Black Mesa tram ride from the first game. This really paints a picture of how the Combine's arrival has affected the planet, and as someone who has only played a tiny bit of Half-Life 2 before, I was fascinated by the state of affairs and what happened before Gordon Freeman woke up. The opening of Half-Life 2 doesn't read as, look at what we can do with our new engine, like Half-Life 1's tram ride, as it all exists only to build the world up. As you're walking through the city, you feel powerless to stop the Combine. They point to where you need to go next, and you can't do anything else but follow orders. This oppressive start is brilliant, and it's almost an inverse of the original Half-Life. In Half-Life 1, you enter Black Mesa to begin a mundane workday. Everything seems calm. As you go into the test chamber though, all hell breaks loose, and then now it's a grueling fight for survival. In Half-Life 2 on the other hand, it feels very bleak right from the very beginning, but as you join up with resistance members and acquire new weapons later on, you're taking the city back, and everything starts to become more hopeful as a result. Soon enough, you meet again with Barney, the Black Mesa security guard from the first game, who was disguised as one of the Combine.
About that beer I owed you. It's me, Gordon, Barney from Black Mesa. Hey, sorry for the scare. I had to put on a show for the cameras. I've been working undercover with civil protection. I can't take too long or they'll get suspicious. I'm way behind on my beating quota.
Barney contacts Dr. Kleiner, one of the scientists that worked at Black Mesa. Now both of these guys showed up in Half-Life 1, but only as NPC templates, with the same security guard and scientist model being used over and over again. The Blue Shift expansion made you play as Barney, and in Half-Life 2, both Dr. Kleiner and Barney are now actual characters and have reoccurring roles in the story.
Gordon Freeman! I expected more warning.
Yeah, you and me both, Doc. He was about to board the express to Nova Prospect.
Well, Barney, what do you intend?
I'm thinking.
It's cool to see them return, and I appreciate this bit of connective tissue from Half-Life 1 to Half-Life 2. Sometimes it feels like this game isn't directly following up the original and may seem a little disconnected at first. While that's not a bad thing per se, it might be somewhat jarring to first-time players coming off the back of Half-Life. I mean, the Zen creatures take a back seat as we're dealing with brand new villains, and there's only one point in the game where you explore a Black Mesa facility. That being said, the story in Half-Life 2 is compelling, and I'm not trying to take away from it. I think it's kinda cool actually how you are thrust into City 17 and you have to piece together what happened between each game. While Half-Life 2 is the direct sequel to Half-Life, it doesn't take place straight after, and I find that to be an interesting choice. So in Chapter 1, you are introduced to the acclaimed physics engine, and yeah, it's pretty awesome. You can pick up any object in the game world and toss it around. After your brief meeting with Dr. Kleiner and Barney, you pile boxes on top of each other in order to climb out of a window. The Half-Life 2 physics engine adds a whole new dimension to the gameplay, and being able to pick up things in the world makes it feel way more tangible. I love the moment right after when a Combine guard just flicks a can on the ground for Gordon to pick up. This small encounter perfectly illustrates this power dynamic between the City 17 civilians and the Combine without any exposition. And this is the visual storytelling that I think works in Half-Life 2. Gordon Freeman tries to head down to Kleiner's lab, but he is pursued by the Combine. As you make your way through these apartment buildings, the more you feel for the civilians of City 17. All of these people are trapped under the iron rule of the Combine, and the decrepit look of these tenements is rather immersive. It's truly the bow that ties the desolation together. The chase sequence on the rooftop is tense, and the Combine are so fucking imposing. I love their black outfits with a white gas mask, since it's menacing without being too over the top. So eventually the Combine traps the player in a corner, but luckily Alex Vance comes to save the day.
We'd better hurry. The Combine can be slow to wake, but once they're up, you don't want to get in their way.
Alex and her father, Eli, are two brand new characters in Half-Life 2, and they are instrumental in this story. Eli Vance was a former Black Mesa employee, and Alex is a leading member of the Resistance fighting back against the Combine. They're both solid characters, but I never felt completely attached to them throughout the game. Maybe it's because Gordon never actually speaks to them, but they seemed more like pawns to get the plot moving from one end to another. Again, they're pretty good characters, and Alex in particular is quite memorable, but I don't think they're insanely well written or fleshed out. Dr. Wallace Breen is the main antagonist of the game, and he is literally a pawn to the Combine, acting as the intermediary between them and the humans. He's a decent arsehole villain character, but that's where my thoughts end. The biggest strength of Half-Life 2 is not in its character writing, but more so how the environments tell the story and the mood they put you in. In the second chapter, you successfully make it to the lab with Alex, and there's some comic relief with Dr. Kleiner and his pet head crab.
Lamar, there you are. You got rid of that. Certainly not. Never fear, Gordon. She's de-beaked and completely harmless.
The intricacies in the animation and the scripting was on another level back in 2004. Valve really put everyone else to shame, with the exception of id Software, but even then, Doom 3 never had character animation like this. Anyway, the player gets to put on that classic HEV suit, and the little Valve music cue that plays is fantastic.
Careful, Lamar. Those are quite fragile. Oh, fine. It'll be another week before I can coax her out of there.
It makes you feel like an absolute badass, and this works in the context of the Half-Life story as well. In the first game, Gordon Freeman was just a scientist who was at the wrong place at the wrong time. He had to use his intellect and tactician skills to fend off against the aliens and the military, and the point of Half-Life 1 was that he was just a normal dude coming into work. In Half-Life 2, the dynamic has shifted to where Gordon has become a bit of a legend, and him putting on the suit is a triumphant badass moment. Gordon and Alex prepare to teleport to Black Mesa East, the facility where Alex Vance is working at. Alex is able to get there just fine, but of course the machine fucks up when Gordon tries to teleport. Gordon is transported outside of Kleiner's lab, Barney hands him the famous Half-Life crowbar, and he makes his way to Black Mesa East on foot. In this chapter, you pass through some dark tunnels where you need to turn the flashlight on. This brings up one of my biggest issues with Half-Life 2. The sprint meter and the flashlight meter are one and the same. Why the fuck did Valve have to design it like this? I know you aren't going to use the flashlight while running very often, but it's still incredibly annoying. This one little mechanic just gets on my nerves, man. Especially in these early chapters when you're down in the tunnels. To round off chapter 2, once you grab the crowbar and head out, you're immediately getting shot at by the Combine with moving trains getting in your way as well. This is a fun little chaotic set piece. The next chapter begins with the Combine assaulting unarmed City 17 civilians in this dank hallway. Fortunately, you have the crowbar so you can start to fight back against the Combine, and this does give you a sense of accomplishment. You're finally standing up for humanity, and even in this one moment, you start to see a positive change with Gordon Freeman around. So you pick up the Combine's pistol, and afterwards you get into some firefights with him. The combat in Half-Life 2 is way less tactical than the first game. Now, Half-Life 1 was a deceptively strategic shooter, where you had to assess the scenario and plan out your attack accordingly. On the harder skill levels, you were forced to utilize all of your equipment or you'd be dead. With the sequel, however, the combat has been much more streamlined and it feels like a typical action game now. That's not to say that the gunplay is bad by any means, in fact I think I prefer it to Half-Life 1. The weapons are still impactful and are more fun to use, but the combat does appear to be designed more for a casual audience in mind. That's perfectly fine by me, as I like the more action-oriented shooting mechanics in games. Oh, and I'm so thankful that Valve made the enemies in Half-Life 2 way less bullet spongy compared to the military soldiers from the first game. The weapon roster has become more streamlined as well. Many of the alien weapons from Half-Life 1 have been outright removed, and that's fair enough, I didn't exactly use them a ton. I really get a kick out of some of the combined scripting in this chapter, like when they roll the exploding barrel down the stairs, drop a bunch of barrels in the water as you're trying to swim, and also when they are firing below you while you're underwater. Seeing their bullets splash into the water is a nice detail, and it adds to the overall tension of the set piece. You get your revenge later on though, when you blow up a bridge that the Combine are standing on, and you witness them collapsing as it's destroyed. As alluded to before with Dr. Kleiner's pet headcrab, certain Zen creatures are now just inhabitants of Earth along with the humans. I think this is super cool, and seeing a Vortigaunt and a human chilling out and watching TV together is incredible. This small piece of world building goes a long way for me, and the player starts to fill in the blanks of what went down during the past 20 years. So there's a physics puzzle later on in the chapter where you have to chuck a bunch of bricks on this side of the plank so you can hop onto the platform. Even though picking up objects is cool and I like using the gravity gun, you've got to admit that these puzzles aren't that fun and don't age amazingly well. To be fair, Half-Life 2 was the first game to have such an intricate physics engine, so they wanted to show it off, and these puzzles were insanely creative back then. When you're done with this stupid brick puzzle, you are then rewarded with a machine gun and plenty of Combine to mow down. Now the machine gun feels pretty fucking good, and the sound effect attached to it is solid. Towards the end of chapter 3, you encounter a ton of manhacks, which are tiny devices with spinning blades on them. When you destroy one, the sparks that fly out look so fucking good. On top of the manhacks, you also get ambushed by some familiar Half-Life 1 enemies, the headcrabs and the zombies. After fighting nothing but Combine for a level, it was great to see some classic Half-Life monsters come back, and it was a nice choice to close the chapter with them.
Hey, Dr. Freeman. I've been hoping you'd show up. Got this airboat all gassed up and ready to go.
Gordon receives an airboat so he can travel safely across the canal filled with toxic waste. But I'd rather just run around, take in the environment, and shoot at bad guys. Plus, I always seem to get stuck on random bits of rubble that halt my progress. Then I have to back up and accelerate from there. It gets annoying after a while, but at least chapter 4 is somewhat short. Also, there are some sections in the level where you get into firefights with the Combine on foot, and these combat scenarios are quite enjoyable. Later on you pick up the revolver, a staple of the Half-Life weapon roster. Now the revolver is as impactful as you remember it being from the first game, and seeing enemies get decimated by it is such a treat. Aside from the on-foot combat encounters, there's nothing too memorable about Water Hazard, and a lot of it is just riding along the canal. That being said, the chopper dropping bombs in front of the airboat towards the end is pretty interesting, and it helps shake up the monotony of just coasting on by with the airboat. During the chapter, the airboat gets upgraded with a gun attachment, and the chopper serves as the closing final boss. It's fine, but aiming the gun can kinda be a pain in the ass. Chapter 4 is one of the low points of the game, but I guess riding around in a vehicle adds some variety to the overall gameplay, so I can't be too harsh on it. Variety is a good thing of course, but the activity should also be entertaining or worth doing, and I don't think this level achieves that. The player has finally reached Black Mesa East, and this is when you meet Eli Vance in person, as well as Dr. Mossman, one of the most integral characters in the game. She switches sides as much as Mac from Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. She's a good person, then she's bad, and then at the very end, she's on the side of the Resistance again. Black Mesa East is a makeshift science facility, and I enjoy looking at all of the little details, like the picture of Eli's family. This chapter is one of the most expositional in Half-Life 2, which might bore some players, but at least the gravity gun is introduced. Sure, getting properly acquainted with these side characters is important and everything, but the feature presentation of this chapter is getting to test out the gravity gun. Stacking boxes to get up onto a higher platform and playing catch with this giant mechanical dog is what you'll be spending your time doing in Chapter 5 using this weapon. This is such an effective way of teaching us how to use the gravity gun, and it doesn't overstay its welcome thankfully. The Combine patrol the area, so Gordon is forced to travel down a tunnel into a ghost town known as Ravenholm. For many players, Chapter 6 is the most atmospheric and isolating level in the game. The moon is out, there's body parts hanging down from trees, and that music track is perfect. Valve did a fantastic job making Ravenholm feel entirely separated from City 17, like it's been lost to time or something. The gravity gun is front and center in this chapter, since you can use it to grab saw blades and chop up the zombies. Black Mesa East was the formal tutorial for the gravity gun, now Ravenholm is your playground to mess around with it more. Although Ravenholm is dark and lonely, you do meet one character on your journey, Father Gregory.
Well done, brother. Make free use of my traps, but take care not to fall in them yourself. Behind you! In Ravenholm, you do well to be vigilant.
This dude is pretty fucking loony, but you warm to him over the course of the chapter, mainly because he's your only ally in this town and he's your only ticket out of here. I actually like Father Gregory a lot, due to him being more wacky than your typical Half-Life character. You also acquire the shotgun in this level, which feels awesome to shoot out. So why don't I really like Ravenholm? The atmosphere, the weapons, and Gregory are all solid, but to me shooting at zombies gets kinda redundant after a while, and the level design isn't that strong. Now I like some gameplay segments of Ravenholm, crushing zombies with the DIY car trap, and the way that Gregory instructs you over the course of the level is good. Also the section with the zombies climbing up the pipes in order to attack you is excellent, and a real highlight of Ravenholm. However, the level itself is confusing to navigate sometimes, and it goes on for a bit too long. There's doors that you think you can open but you really can't, and the layout of one of the later sections featuring this platform is downright bad. I want to love this chapter as it's something completely unique from the Half-Life 2 campaign, but the level design lets it down. After our adventure in Ravenholm, we wind back up in another vehicle, this time in a dune buggy of sorts. Eli has been captured and taken to a place called Nova Prospect, and it's up to Gordon to save him. Highway 17 is a very good chapter as it features plenty of well-crafted set pieces. Driving around in the car is not that enjoyable to be honest. The handling is a pain in the arse, and when you activate the boost, you tend to spin out and crash once it's done. Some people might just love driving around these environments, but I don't, and want to get to the next set piece. That being said, every single big moment in this chapter is incredible. The section where the old colonel hands you the RPG to destroy the Combine ship. It's extremely entertaining. Performing the crane puzzle soon after though is like pulling teeth, and the crane itself is so fucking slow. The highlight of Highway 17 is the bridge section, when you need to slowly platform to the other side and turn the force field power off. This is the second force field you come across in this chapter, and the first one was very easy to deactivate, so it's a genuine surprise when you realize that you need to go under a fucking bridge to do so. The music that plays when you're inching your way across the bridge is beautiful. The enemies that show up actually feel so much more threatening since you're so high up, and the entire set piece is awesome. Walking on the support beams is so daunting the first time, and it's enthralling stuff. This is my favorite moment in Half-Life 2. Period. Once you make your way across, turn the power off and go back, another Combine ship appears to ruin your day. This is such a brilliant twist, and when you destroy it and start heading back along the bridge, it becomes less of a big deal now that you've done it already. There's not a ton of fat in this chapter, and every big moment is reasonably paced. The only major issues I have with Highway 17 are the driving controls for the dune buggy and that annoying crane puzzle. That being said, Highway 17 is a standout chapter, all things considered. Sand Traps is the next chapter, and it's basically Highway 17 Part 2, which is unfortunate. The mandatory wave-based combat is fine now, but by the end of the game, you get kinda sick of it. The gunplay is a little bit generic compared to Half-Life 1, as I mentioned earlier, and aside from the Combine ships dealing out a ton of damage, the enemies don't pose that much of a threat. I don't really like the tactical based combat in the first Half-Life, and while the combat is way more enjoyable in this game, it might be a bit too simplistic and streamlined. The most obnoxious part in this level is the titular sand traps. Basically, you have to use the gravity gun to place objects on top of the sand to safely walk across, because if you touch the sand itself, antlions will come out.
You there! Stop where you idiot! Walking on the sand brings antlions after you! You idiot! Walking on the sand brings antlions! Dear God! Poor Laszlo! The finest mind of his generation. To come to such an end. We were heading for the Vortigaunt camp. To pick up some damn things and leave us alone. But without Laszlo, what's the point? I know you tried to help. I'll stay with him a while. There's something I have to do.
This sounds fun at first, but it overstays its welcome, and you're better off just running over the sand and shotgunning the enemies. You'll obtain some theropods from this Vortigaunt so that you can command the antlions to attack enemies.
The Freemen will do wise to heed our extraction of the Myrmidon's aromatic theropods. The process is not entirely hygienic, therefore stand aside. The Freemen will have need of these theropods on the paths ahead. Gather them now. The Freeman must follow.
This is a huge component of the last set piece in the chapter, and yeah, that's a disappointing section as well. Sand traps could have been cut, and I wouldn't have missed it. The entire chapter could have been condensed down into Highway 17, but instead we have a complete level of basically the same thing, just minus the incredible moments such as the bridge sequence. The player has now arrived at Nova Prospect, the Combine base where Eli is being held. The abandoned prison setting is interesting to explore, but this is one of the more forgettable chapters. Sure, they introduce the turrets and you can use the bugs to kill Combine soldiers, but not much else sticks out in my mind. Now chapter 9 is a very brief chapter, since when you reunite with Alyx, the game transitions to chapter 9A.
Sorry it took me so long. Glad to see you're okay. Let's see if we can find Mossman. It looks like this station might give me better access.
I have no idea why this is the only time in the game where they use this numbering system, especially when Sand Traps could have easily been chapter 7A. Why couldn't they just have Nova Prospect and Entanglement be the same chapter? Or if they were dead set on separating them, why not just call it chapter 10 and save us the confusion? Anyway, chapter 9A starts with you meeting up with Alyx again. She's always cool to have around, fighting alongside you and to hear what she has to say. You kill more Combine while she opens locked doors, and then you eventually find Eli. Alyx sends him to the teleport chamber, and now your task is to get there while she patches into the radio system. The wave-based combat returns, as groups of Combine swarm your position. Valve tries to break up the monotony a bit with the turrets you can place around the map to attack enemies, but it's still just wave after wave of Combine until the game allows you to progress again. The story becomes more and more compelling in this chapter, with Alyx confronting Dr. Mossman and all that, but then we have another generic combat area to go through after. It's not too bad, the weapons are enjoyable to use after all, but it does drag on for too long. I've heard people say that Half-Life 2 has perfect pacing, but I can't disagree more. Sure, it has its variety. You're shooting at bad guys, you're solving puzzles, you're riding around in vehicles, you're doing this, you're doing that, but the amount of time you spend doing one activity can be too long sometimes. So Alyx and Gordon head back to Dr. Kleiner's lab while Eli teleports to the Citadel, a tall skyscraper that serves as the Combine's main headquarters. When Alyx and Gordon teleported out of Nova Prospect, the building exploded, which caused a massive uprising for the humans.
Gordon? My God, how did you get here? And when?
What's wrong?
My dear, I had given up hope of ever seeing you again.
I was afraid we might not make it either. I think the teleport exploded just as we were porting out.
Indeed it did, and the repercussions were felt far and wide, but that was over a week ago.
What do you mean? Gordon and I were just there a minute ago.
Fascinating.
This starts Chapter 10, where Gordon fights alongside the humans of City 17. The game hands you some allies to support you in combat, but their AI is annoying as fuck, as they always seem to get in your way. Every time you're in a tight corridor, it's just a matter of time before they block your path. The mines that you have to defuse with the gravity gun also halts your progress, as it takes a little too long to pull them out of the ground. Revisiting the City 17 apartments, now armed to the teeth with guns, is a nice touch, and perfectly encapsulates how much of a journey we've been on. Standout moments like this are few and far between, however. The tunnel section with the toxic waste, where you need to painstakingly place boxes down to move across, is a pain in the ass. And as a whole, I don't have a lot to talk about with Chapter 10. It's more combat mostly, but in City 17. The next chapter starts with the bullshit straight away, since you have to deal with the window snipers. You can't use the machine gun or crossbow to take care of them. The only weapon that works is the grenade, which is completely unfair and artificially bolsters up the difficulty. I know you can use the gravity gun to pick up cover, but I hate the fact that you are completely dependent on the grenades. Some of the combat sections are quite solid, like the rooftop battle with the Combine, but then another bullshit part occurs, this time with an enemy called the Strider. This guy is a giant three-legged fuckhead that shoots at a rapid rate, and they can chip away at your health incredibly fast. It takes a few rockets to take them out, and in this one section in particular, there's a couple of them in a single location. After that nonsense, there's another set piece with some Combine and another fucking Strider. They throw these enemies in just to cheapen the overall difficulty, and chapters 10 and 11 specifically put a bad taste in my mouth. These chapters are definitely the weakest in the entire game, which is sad because they should be the most climactic. Oh sorry, I stand corrected. They're climactic alright. Climactically fucking shit. The player has finally made it to the Citadel, where all of your weapons are taken away from you. That's perfectly fine by me, however, since you get a powered up gravity gun as a result. This gun wrecks fucking shop, and while it doesn't make up for those disastrous chapters beforehand, it's still absolutely incredible blowing away Combine soldiers with the gravity gun now. Dr. Mossman betrays Dr. Breen by releasing Gordon, Alyx, and Eli. The player destroys a machine called the Dark Energy Reactor at the top of the Citadel, and then the G-Man returns.
Time, Dr. Freeman? Is it really that time again? It seems as if you only just arrived. You've done a great deal in a small time span. You've done so well, in fact, that I've received some interesting offers for your services. Ordinarily, I wouldn't contemplate them, but these are extraordinary times.
He puts Gordon back in stasis, just like in Half-Life 1, and the game ends. My thoughts on Half-Life 2 are complicated, similar to my feelings towards the first Half-Life. I love some of the level design choices and the strong visual storytelling. I think there are strokes of brilliance in Half-Life 2, but I also have plenty of issues with the game. The combat can sometimes get repetitive, certain levels drag on for way too long, some of the puzzles are not that fun or engaging, and the vehicles do not handle well at all. But I still get a kick out of facing the Combine, playing many of the masterful set pieces in the game, noticing the little environmental details, and piecing together what happened to the world during the past 20 years. I like Half-Life 2, similar to how I like Half-Life 1, but I don't think I love it just yet. However, I do prefer Half-Life 2 over the first game. With the sequel, Valve truly innovated with their brand new physics engine. That's what the Half-Life series is truly about in my mind. Half-Life 1 was built on the Gold Source engine, and featured a realistic world with unbroken level progression. Half-Life 2 was made to show off Valve's advanced physics engine. Half-Life Alyx was the first VR game that truly made a splash. When Valve created Half-Life games in favor of the story instead of the technology with episodes 1 and 2, they got burnt out, and they fucked themselves with the biggest cliffhanger in gaming history. So nowadays, I don't see Half-Life 3 coming out, unless there's out-of-the-world technology to match, and there's nothing beyond VR at the moment. Whenever there's a massive leap forward in gaming technology, there's typically a Half-Life game that follows, kinda like how when the G-Man needs Gordon Freeman, he awakens.
Rather than offer you the illusion of free choice, I will take the liberty of choosing for you. If and when your time comes round again.